We started recording. We have about 30 in right now, so we'll give it a few seconds. I guess while everyone's joining, my name is Morgan Nelson. I am the Senior Director of Alumni Engagement at Lehigh in the Alumni Relations Office. We're up to about almost 100, so I will give it some more time. So we're excited today. I'm excited to have Steve back. Steve is the class of 91. He is a chief storyteller and founder of The Best Why. So we had Steve as a host in the creative writing group over the summer, and he was such a hit, fantastic. And we received such positive feedback from that gathering that we decided he'd be a fantastic host for our Mountain Talk. So Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. I think we're pretty good with the numbers, so we can get started.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and hello, everyone. Thanks for choosing to spend a few minutes with me today. And what I'm going to talk about is what it takes to effectively connect with any audience. Now, people who have something to sell always have something to say, and make no mistake, we are all selling something. From for-profit companies selling products and services to not-for-profits and politicians selling ideas, to your teenager trying to sell you some BS about how where they're going really isn't a party. We all think we know what we need to say to make our case. The problem is we are often wrong. What we are selling isn't the problem, but rather the messages we choose to get the job done. We know what we have to offer, and we think we know what it is we need to say to make a convincing argument. Where we get stuck is thinking about the things from our own perspective rather than from the perspective of those we're trying to influence. The two questions you must ask before even starting to craft a message are, what is the problem I am solving for my audience? And where is the common ground with that audience? So today I'm going to run you through two quick little knowledge nuggets and 3 stories that will give you a glimpse into the thinking necessary for effectively communicating with an audience. All right. Nugget 1, the problem with personas. All right, people love data because it can be structured, organized, calculated, and compared. And as traditional marketing evolved into the digital world we now live in, companies began dividing up their customers into groups that are sometimes called personas. And it's not an easy task to turn people into data, but marketers have been trying for more than 2 decades. Like I said, people love data, but people themselves are not good data, and certainly not clean nor pretty data. Now, I don't like personas for several reasons. But aside from being fairly ineffective, they can be both racist and classist. I did some work for a major US bank a few years ago, and while I was there, they rolled out a whole new set of personas. And one of them began, and I swear I am not making this up, Juan and Maria own a taco truck. I honestly couldn't believe that's what they were saying. Instead of using race, class, and stereotypes to categorize customers, I much prefer to use circumstances. So instead of what the bank said, they would have been much better off saying a small family-owned business with real estate, transportation, and cash flow challenges. Not only does this cover many more businesses with the same challenges, but it focuses on what they're dealing with rather than who they are. And this is one step closer to that common ground I mentioned. Of course, circumstances aren't exactly a silver bullet either when you're trying to connect with an audience. Now, some of you may have seen what I'm about to show you. But recently, this has been bopping around the internet, and here is a set of customer circumstances. White male, born in 1948, wealthy, self-employed, raised in London, travels internationally, likes dogs and fine wine, has children, has been married, divorced, and remarried. Now, this seems like a fairly specific set of circumstances, and it accurately describes King Charles. Great. These are the circumstances that described King Charles. However, these same circumstances also accurately describe Ozzy Osbourne. So you can see how difficult it is to accurately turn people into data. Nugget 2, 4 channels to better connection. So when you're on the receiving end of a message, when you are the audience, your brain consumes information through 4 distinct channels. As a presenter, when you don't use all 4 of them, you're leaving connection opportunities on the table. So the 4 channels are visual data, words, numbers, and facts that you see; oral data, words, numbers, and facts that you hear; visual feelings, subjective things that you see, like colors, beauty, body language, shapes, and patterns; and then oral feelings, subjective things that you hear, like music, sounds, vocal cues like sighs and tone. Now, I have a friend who's a recruiter here in Charlotte, North Carolina. Her customer base is mostly accounting, finance, and operations people, a very data-driven audience. So a few weeks ago, she made a 60-second intro video for LinkedIn, and I'm going to play you the first half of it. So hold on a second.
Hi, and thank you for connecting with me. I'm so pleased to have you a part of my network. My name is Jessica Shuttleworth, and I'm an accounting, finance, and operations recruiter with over 10 years of experience. I place folks all the way from senior accountants to financial analysts, accounting managers, controller, and finance directors, all the way to C-suite level folks, predominantly in the manufacturing and distribution space. My clients are all very different, but they usually have just one thing in common, and that is they want to attract and hire best possible talent. And that is where Omada Search comes in.
So when I saw it, I thought it was nice and certainly better than no video at all. But knowing her target audience, I thought she could be doing better. She was really only using 2 channels: oral data, the things she was saying, and visual feelings, the appearance of her on video. So I asked her if she would let me enhance it, and then she could ask her followers which one they liked better. So here is the same clip, but now in an enhanced form.
Hi, and thank you for connecting with me. I'm so pleased to have you a part of my network. My name is Jessica Shuttleworth, and I'm an accounting, finance, and operations recruiter with over 10 years of experience. I place folks all the way from senior accountants to financial analysts, accounting managers, controller, and finance directors, all the way to C-suite level folks, predominantly in the manufacturing and distribution space. My clients are all very different, but they usually have just one thing in common, and that is they want to attract and hire best possible talent, and that is where Omada Search comes in.
So you can see in the new video, she's now using all 4 channels to convey the same message, which will dramatically increase the chances that her message will resonate with that audience that she has. So now moving on to stories. Story number 1 is what I call foster parenting M&A. I have a client who was acquired by a private equity firm, and the new owner has steadily purchased small, relevant, related companies and asked my client to sort of fold them up under their strong existing brand. Now, the larger company knows their client base well, and they communicate with them effectively. However, when you inherit an established audience, like the customers that came with these new companies, you can't just treat them like your existing customer base. They're different, and you need to learn how to communicate with them. Mergers and acquisitions are tricky. So in March of this year, my wife and I welcomed a 12-year-old foster child into our home. Our 4 older children are either in or done with college, and none of them went to Lehigh, but none of them went to Lafayette either, so I consider that a win. This young man who came to live with us has been through a lot. And as he went to school this fall, we've had to learn new ways to get through to a 5th grader. All of our previous experience helping kids with homework seems to be now useless. Every Friday, he has a science vocabulary quiz, and my wife and I both come from the drill it into your head until you know it school of memorization. And we tried this approach, and it was like shooting a BB gun at a battleship. Every attempt just bounced off him, and we were working hard, but making 0 progress. One evening, we're sitting in the kitchen after dinner, and I'm drilling him with flashcards, and he is having none of it. One of the words he had to learn was insulator, which was defined by his class as a material through which heat does not travel easily. As I read him the definition and he guessed wrong for the umpteenth time, I decided to do something. And I popped up out of my chair and asked him to do the same. So we walked over to the oven, which was still warm from dinner. And I placed his hand on the oven door and I asked, "Is the oven door hot?" He looked at me and cautiously said, "No." And then I opened the oven. And it wasn't too hot, so don't worry, I wasn't threatening him. I opened the oven door and asked him to stick his hand into the oven. I said, "Is the inside of the oven hot?" And he said, "Yeah, it is." So I closed the oven door and with a bit of a dramatic flourish, like a theater major might, I said, "The oven door is an insulator." And for the next 20 seconds, I watched his little brain just sort of process this. And he looks up at me and he says, "I get it now. The oven door is an insulator." And then this is the magic moment. He pointed over my shoulder to the refrigerator door and said, "And the refrigerator door is an insulator too, but in reverse." So we had finally cracked the code on how to reach this new audience, this merger and acquisition that had come into our home. And now when we do vocabulary, I make sure to start with concrete real world examples. And by the way, he is crushing his Friday quizzes. Like I said, mergers and acquisitions are tricky. Story 2 is what I call nanotechnology little brother. So sometimes your audience is very broad and you don't know a lot about it. And this mountain talk is a perfect example. And I'll briefly address that at the end of this presentation. So how do you craft a message based on next to nothing? Well, here's the story. Back in the early 2000s, I was the director of communications for a biotech nanotech startup. And we worked closely with the Rochester Institute of Technology. And because of this, we were asked to give a presentation at their annual Brick City Festival, which is pretty much undergraduate parents' weekend, homecoming, and community open house all rolled up into one. Our CEO was triple booked that day, and so it fell on me to make the presentation. I asked my contact what I could expect as far as the audience was concerned, and she said, "Well, it'll be everything from college professors all the way down to the younger siblings of undergraduates. Good luck." Now, our technology was complicated. It was literally the intersection of DNA and microelectronics at the nanoscale. I wanted to impress the professors with what we were doing, but I also, having been a little sibling at events like this myself in the past, I wanted to make sure to engage everyone present. So here's what I did. I started out by spending 5 minutes explaining how small a nanometer is. Now, nanometers are 10 to the negative 9th meters. So I started in the opposite direction, showing a picture of the sun, which is basically 10 to the 9th meters in size. Slide by slide, I showed examples of 10 to the 9th, 10 to the 8th, 10 to the 7th, all the way down till I got to 1 meter, at which point I pulled up an actual meter stick and showed it to everybody. Then I continued down into the negatives, showing examples of negative exponents until I got to 10 to the negative 9th meters, a nanometer. I then went into a fairly sophisticated explanation of our technology, how it works, what it does, and how we work together with RIT to make things happen. Afterward, a family of an RIT freshman came up to talk to me. The father shook my hand and told me he worked in particle physics for a defense contractor and wanted to know what kind of chemist I was. I told him I was the English and theater major kind, and we both had a good laugh, though I don't think he actually believed me. Then I turned to the freshman's little brother, who could not have been more than 10 years old. And I leaned in and asked him, "What did you learn this morning?" Beaming, he looked up at me and said, "I now understand how small a nanometer is. It's as small as the sun is large." And in that moment, I knew I'd succeeded in connecting with everyone in the room. The third story, and this is one that everyone in business should really pay attention to, is something I call missing opportunities. Now, one of the things I do with the organizations that I work with is ask them to dig deep into their sales databases and customer comments to find missing marketing opportunities. The goal is to reveal things their customers love about them that they themselves aren't particularly aware of, and you'd be amazed at what we find. The result is a list of positive, customer-pleasing details and attributes that can be added to existing messaging or made into new campaigns altogether. To further illustrate, I know by this time you're surprised, another story. When I was in high school, I was a pretty regular kid. I had friends, pretty good grades, a respectable wardrobe, and I was a competitive runner. I knew the things I liked about myself, and it was these features I relied upon when navigating the merciless waters of a public high school in the 1980s. I was tall and very skinny, so my body was not on the short list of things to emphasize. One day, my younger sister had a few friends over, and sitting in the adjacent room, I couldn't help but overhear some of their conversation. My sister's friend Kathy kept referring in a rather amorous way to someone she referred to as SL. She mentioned this mysterious SL several times over the course of an hour, and I made a mental note to ask my sister who the heck she was talking about later in the evening. So after dinner, I walked into my sister's room and I said, "Hey, who is this SL Kathy kept talking about?" My sister looked up at me and started laughing in that way where it takes like a minute or two to stop. And when she finally regained control of herself, she looked straight at me and said, "So you want to know who SL is? It's you, you idiot." Confused, I said, "What? Me? What? My initials are SN, not SL." My sister sighed and said, "It's not your initials, you fool. Kathy calls you SL because she thinks you have sexy legs." I had never noticed that running pretty much year round had made my legs something a 10th grade girl would take notice of. Yet, there it was. So until you take the time to dig deep into all the reasons your customers love you, you're probably missing something great about what you have to offer that you never even considered sharing. So that is just a glimpse at what it takes to effectively connect with an audience. Simply put, until you make the effort to look at your messaging through their eyes rather than your own, you're going to be missing out on the best connections. And there are a lot of ways to do this. Today, I've just touched on a few of them, but the method is nowhere near as important as the recognition of the need to do it. Now, as for the question regarding how I decided to approach this talk today, when in doubt, tell a story or two or three, because everybody loves stories. So thank you for attending today, and I hope that you're walking away with something you can use.
Thank you, Steve. As always, very intriguing, and we love having you. So I will open it up to the audience. Please add any questions that you might have for Steve. We can address them in the next 10 minutes or so. But right now, I'm just, Steve, I'm curious to know, how did you, from Lehigh to where you are now, how did this path evolve, and how did you get to where you are at the moment and doing what you are doing?
Well, when I was at Lehigh, I was obviously surrounded by engineers and technical people. I worked in the Lehigh computer store. And so my first job out of college was as a technical writer, starting out in the IT space, and then eventually in the rock and roll business. Actually, I worked in marketing for audio electronics for 5 years, which is why I love making Ozzy Osbourne references. But I found out early on that I was someone who could speak both technical and regular English, and that I could sort of bridge the gap between engineers, scientists, programmers, and the rest of the English-speaking world. So I've sort of continued on that path in a number of roles, marketing, sales, communications, and so on. And as I headed into this consulting arrangement for going on 3 years now, it just seems that there's a need out there for what I do, and I really love doing it.
Awesome. So you and we discussed a little bit before we hopped on here live, just about this Friday, Saturday, Sunday audience theory.
Yeah,
If you could just dive a little bit into that. I really thought that was really interesting and stuck with me.
So my theater professor and advisor was Augustin Ripa, who was the head of the theater department at Lehigh back when I was there. And the first production I ever did with him was the Thursday night dress rehearsal. And he laid it out and he said, "Listen, you guys need to be aware that the Friday night audience, the Saturday night audience, and the Sunday afternoon audience are all very different." And we're like, "What are you talking about? It's the same play. It's going to attract the same people." Well, people who go to a play on a Friday night have finished their work week. They have sort of pent up energy. They maybe grab a quick dinner, maybe an adult beverage, and they head off to the theater. And so they are basically primed and pumped and ready to be entertained. So getting a laugh on a Friday night is pretty easy. Your timing doesn't have to be perfect. As long as it's there, they're going to get it. Saturday night audience, they slept in late. They've been doing stuff around the house. They went out to dinner at 5:30, and they have big bellies full of pot roast and pizza and whatnot. They probably had 2 glasses of wine. So now they've plunked themselves down in the chair at the theater at 7:30, and they're half asleep already. So to get their attention, to get them going is going to be a lot more work. And then a Sunday afternoon audience is similarly different in that they tend to be more of a family-oriented audience, so that parents are sort of a little bit on edge, trying to make sure that your play isn't going to say something that they have to put hands over their kids' ears. So they're a little more tentative. So Friday night, rock and roll; Saturday, half asleep; Sunday afternoon, tentative, even though they're all functionally attracted to the same play in the same venue.
It's interesting. It was really neat to hear that. So I did get a question, and this topic is very relevant in athletics recruiting, where there is often quite an age gap between 18-year-olds, their parents, and myself. What suggestions do you have for gaining and understanding which message each group is receiving?
Well, it goes back to the 2 points that I made earlier. I'll bring those back up here. The 2 questions that you have to ask, which is, what problem am I solving? And so for a parent and a student athlete, the problem is different. The parents are saying, is my child going to be safe? Is my child going to be exploited? Is this coach going to be not only good to my child and keep them healthy, but are they also going to recognize my child's talents? The flip side of that is the athlete might be coming at it from a different perspective. They may want the hardest, most difficult program. They may want to be pushed, and they're not too concerned about the time they have to spend doing academics. So it really takes time to sort of come up with, do sort of a Venn diagram. Write down in one circle the number of things that you think that the parents are mostly concerned with, and then do the same thing with the kids. Hopefully you can find a couple of things that are overlapping in the Venn diagram, so when you have both audiences in the room at the same time, you can address those things. But when you're alone with the athlete, you're going to want to emphasize different things. And when you're alone with the parent, you're going to want to emphasize different things, but also keeping in mind the things that the other audience is concerned about. You don't want to tell the parents something that they're going to repeat back to the student that's going to undermine their audience. So I'm not telling you, whoever asked that question, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know about the complexity of what you're dealing with, but really just take the time to figure out the 2 or 3 or 4 things that is most important to each side, and try and figure out a way to blend those together and attend to them. The good thing to remember is that for the most part, people are going to pay attention to the things they want to hear. So you can probably say a lot of the things together, and the athlete's going to hear one thing and the parents are going to hear the other.
Great. So across all the industries that you have worked with, is there any particular one, industry or population, that is most or more difficult to reach than the other?
I've done a lot of work in ed tech, and ed tech is tricky because the people making the business decisions tend to be administrators, but the people pushing those administrators to make a particular choice tend to be educators, but the educators tend to be influenced by parents and, to a degree, students. So you've got this sort of multi-layered audience that you're trying to reach, all of which you want to send in your direction, but often for very different reasons. So I would say that anytime you've got nested audience, so it's if your decision maker and your audience and the people you're trying to influence are all the same, that's the easiest. When you start fragmenting your audience into, well, the decision maker, let's say in a technical, I had a client who was industrial technology, and the decision maker for the work we were doing was a purchasing agent, but the specifier was an engineer. So the person who actually wrote the purchase order was someone who didn't know much about the product, but the person we had to educate about the product wasn't the person making the purchasing decision. So we had to sort of segment it out and make sure that the purchasing person realized this was a good value, but the engineer realized this was the right product for the job.
Great, thank you. How best can you be true to your own personality, using your best strengths when presenting to an audience, and also adapt your style to the majority personality of the crowd?
Well, the trickiest component of that question is making sure you know who you are. And the easiest way to figure that out is when you are talking to an audience, and that, again, could be a 3-year-old, it could be a boardroom, it could be 1,000 people, it could be the Super Bowl. Whenever you find yourself speaking easily, naturally, not nervous, not concerned about the accuracy of what you're saying, not worried about what other people are thinking, that is your sweet spot. And so that's the place to start. presentations like this is one of my happy places. So I love talking about things that are meaningful to people, and then I love engaging with them specifically afterwards. So for me, my wife would rather die than be on this webinar right now or stand up in front of people. We go to work things for her work, and she turns to me on the way there and she's like, "Be my friend." I'm like, "These are your work friends." She goes, "Well, yeah, but don't leave me." I'm like, "Okay, fine." Anyway, so figure out who you are and figure out what you're most comfortable with and the things that make you tick, the things that you're excited about, the things that make your heart warm. And then again, look at that audience and see where there's overlap between what makes you smile and what they need to hear. I put it most succinctly. You need to figure out, and this is true across the board, of where the intersection between the things you need to say and the things they need to hear are. There are very few companies that can get away with what Apple does, where they say, "Oh, well, they didn't know what they needed until I told them about it." But that's actually not what they do. They do an incredible amount of research into where there are voids in the marketplace. So they are solving problems that people didn't necessarily know they had. But the moment they are able to articulate that problem, people realize, "Yeah, I'd like that solved." And sometimes they miss the mark. But for the most part, you need to find the common area between what you need to say and what they need to hear.
Awesome. So Sarah in our audience said she loved the Friday, Saturday night, and Sunday performance example. She said she puts out a monthly newsletter to a member organization in Charlotte, North Carolina. Do you have any advice about the best day of the week and time of day to capture the most members to engage with the content?
Well, part of that would have to do with the sort of work cycle for what this group is. When they are most likely not to be distracted by their work. So if it was school bus drivers, I would not send it out at 7 a.m. or 4 p.m, because that's when they're driving buses. There's a lot of actually pretty good research out there on when the best time to send newsletters out is. And believe it or not, one of the best times for business related newsletters is Sunday afternoon. People tend to stay away from their email on Sunday mornings. But once lunch on Sunday has happened, they tend to start sort of working their way up to their work week. Their business inboxes tend not to be inundated over the weekend. So there's a lot less competition. And if it's something that they're inclined to want to look at, they actually have more time to look at a business related newsletter on a Sunday afternoon than they do on a Monday morning. So I would encourage you to do a little Googling on timing. And obviously it's going to depend to a degree on the industry. But there's a decent amount of information out there on the best times to do that. And some of the bigger, like MailChimp and Constant Contact have some decent research on that as well, right inside their questions and answer sessions in their platforms.
Awesome. So Steve, this is switching it up a bit, but you mentioned a little bit about the political messaging. Can you give an example of bridging the gap in that context?
Well, I did mention that not-for-profits and politicians are equally charged with selling ideas. I have done very little work in consulting when it comes to politics. I actually, foolishly or not, is still a point of debate. I actually ran for political office back in 2009. I functionally ran for mayor of my suburb of Rochester, New York. They wiped the floor with me. I got 15% against a well-funded Republican and a entrenched Democrat, and I ran as an independent. Politics is tricky, but if you are going to be in a predominantly positive light, I would make a point of sticking to substantive things. We're in the political season right now, and I probably get 20 letter-sized postcards in my mail every day. And the ones that turn me off are the ones that either A, just attack the other person, or B, have a lot of glittering generalities. That may be a term you remember from high school English class, where you've got a bunch of bullet points that say things like supported seniors programs. And if you push through on that, they're like, well, he voted for the budget that had money for the senior center. Well, that person didn't actually actively support senior programs. They just didn't not cut it. So give them something tangible to hang there, to hold on to. Give them something meaningful that will is something that they can share, because for the most part, people don't share their, oh, I got this postcard from John Smith. He's running for town councilman. Let me tell you what he said. Most of the time, people just throw these things away. So I would say get past the very non-risky generality type stuff and move into something specific that people can really, sink their teeth into. You might lose 10 or 15% of your potential voters on that, but you're going to lose those people anyway. So you may as well stick with something meaningful for the people who are inclined to consider your candidate.
All right, awesome. So just a few more.
Yep.
What do you think about the rise in influencer advertising and messaging? How do you think social media is changing the way people engage with businesses?
All right. Well, I have 5 kids, 22, 21, 20, 18, and 12. And you met the 12-year-old earlier, the one who's studying flashcards and doesn't like me doing it. The amount of sort of social media and influencer type stuff that they are influenced by, certainly more than someone of my generation. I think the value of influencer marketing, and to a degree, it's always been there. Okay. It's just that it's now power to the people, right? So some 12-year-old girl putting on lip gloss and sparkles on her forehead can be an influencer as much as a famous person can. I'm going to be a cranky old man here and say it's not going to last because it's unsustainable. But in the short term, you have to recognize that a lot of money is going in that direction. So, I would stick with influencers that have some substance to them. There's in Roscoe, New York, which is along Route 17 up in the Poconos, there's a diner called the Roscoe Diner. And they have these bumper stickers that they give to everyone that says, the world famous Roscoe Diner. And when you ask them what they're famous for, they won't say the pie. They won't say the biscuits and gravy. I kid you not. They say, we're famous for being famous. So they knew about the Kardashians before the Kardashians became the Kardashians. And so anyone who's famous just for the sake of being famous, I would say doesn't have a lot of staying power. If you can find influencers that have some substance to them, that I would say would be a better way to go. But yeah, social media, I mean, everybody's got a soapbox now, and you cannot underestimate the value of that. That said, most of the time people are going to go out and say things about a product, service, or company online. They tend to err on the negative side. People who are happy are happy. They don't bother to get on the internet and grouse about it. So having a good listening campaign, knowing what's being said about your company, and being able to get out ahead of problems before they become real big problems, that's the best way, as far as I'm concerned, to handle communication and social media.
So Brad Price, class of 91, actually, and
hi, Brad.
97, is on and actually told me to tell you, he said hello, but also he added that this audience, the Lehigh audience, might be interested in hearing a little bit more about the Dirty Hands Academy and the Tesla parts car build, etc. Also, he said a thank you for the computer store shout out.
Well, Brad and I worked together at the computer store from 89 to 91. Dirty Hands Academy was a little venture I started a few years ago, basically teaching drivers of any age things they should know about their car. Simple things that people don't learn anymore, like how to change a tire, how to not change your oil, but how to read a check engine light, and all the stuff that's pretty out there for most people. And I just drove me crazy how much people get ripped off by mechanics and car dealers. Unfortunately, it started out as an in-person class, and we were starting to get some momentum here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And then this thing called COVID hit, and nobody wanted to come to my garage and learn how to change a tire anymore. And I can't say that I blame them with what was going on. So Dirty Hands Academy may come back at another time in an online form. But life gets in the way, and I just haven't gotten around to doing that yet. But the project, and I know, Morgan, you and I were talking about this before things started. I'm pretty heavily involved in the EV conversion space, where people take old cars and they plunk motors and batteries from wrecked electric cars into them and basically build their own electric car. And I'm about halfway through a conversion of a 1984 Mercedes Roadster with a Tesla motor and batteries from a Chevy Volt. My wife thinks I'm crazy, but it's been a lot of fun, and there's an absolutely massive community of people doing this. So I think you're going to see a decent amount of the collector car and the hot rod community sort of drift towards this, just because, I'd say in the next 10 or 15 years, most of us are going to be driving electric cars, whether we want to or not.
Awesome. Someone else you might know, Dan Long, said, outstanding presentation. Great to see you. How much of your experience and exemplary record as a Lehigh Griffin prepared you for coaching clients to frame their messaging?
I will tell you something that I tell my kids and other kids. I was a Boy Scout leader for years. I've used this story over and over again. So I was a Griffin in Draveau for my senior year. I only was a Griffin my senior year, which I know is an odd path, but I decided my senior year, I'd like to mold the minds of some young freshmen. The very first day, we all sat down in the hallway, 13 freshmen sitting around me, and there I was, their leader, who was all of 3 years older than them. And I said, look, you don't know it, but right now you're sitting here among some of your best lifetime friends. And I said, here's the deal as far as me being in charge of you. You guys got a book that has a bunch of rules in it. You are expected to know and follow those rules. And if I have to decide between my ass and your ass, I'm choosing yours. So don't make me make that choice. Because, you know, college is about exploring. College is about finding where the boundaries are. College is about making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So I didn't want to be the hard ass that just says, damn it, these are the list of rules and you're going to follow them and I'm going to enforce them. And if you make a mistake, you're going to get in trouble. I remember what it was like to be a freshman. The rules had changed quite a bit as far as drinking and alcohol possession and things like that at Lehigh between 1987 and 1990. But I wanted to make sure that they understood that their autonomy, their decision-making skills, their ability to manage themselves, both personally, but in the context of the hallway and me and the rules, was what was at stake. And that is a philosophy that has stuck with me for every year since then. So Dan Long, spot on.
Awesome. Last one, and then we will send everyone on their way. Any suggestions for running a fundraising gala for a nonprofit organization?
Yeah, I actually just did one of these. I work with a not-for-profit here in Charlotte, North Carolina called Baby Bundles, and they put together about $400 worth of what they call a baby shower in a bag. So it's a year's worth of onesies and a bottle system and blankets and picture books. And basically it's all the things that someone would get from a baby shower, but it's given to underprivileged moms and their infants who are unlikely to have had a community that's going to support them with stuff like that. The big shift we made, this organization was started by 3 women who all had an infant loss of some kind. And when they started the organization, they kind of made it about themselves, and justifiably so. They're like, look, we had this bad experience and we want to give back to the community. But when I came on to start helping them sort of craft their message a little different, I said, you know, you guys have been doing this for a number of years now. You've given out 10,000 of these bundles. You need to start shifting your messaging from who you are and why you do this to who you're helping and why it matters. Because there's a finite number of people who care about who you are and why you started this organization. But who you're helping and what it means to them, that's a universal message. Mm-hmm. So for a not-for-profit fundraiser, I would say emphasize the stories of the people who are benefited, who get the benefit of the organization. Who are you helping and how is that making the world a better place? That's what I'd focus on rather than why this organization was started, who all the sponsors are. And I recognize some of that's necessary, but focus on the stories of who you're helping and you will be turning people away at the door.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think that is it for all of the questions. I think we actually were able to cover them all, but right. I do want to let everyone know that we will be sharing out Steve's email address, LinkedIn after this with a really brief short survey, just so that you can help us continue to get better. But awesome. Steve, thank you so much. I'm so glad we were able to work together again, and I'm hoping that we can definitely continue to and connect in the future and keep you involved.
Fantastic. Go Lehigh.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Yes, go Lehigh. We will talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.